This is round 8 of 15 from the 2014 World Rapid Chess Championship. Carlsen has black in this one versus Yuriy Kryvoruchko. And Yuri opens with e4, c5. We see this as the Sicilian Canal-Sokolsky variation, but what we'll soon see is that it looks very similar to what opening? Can you identify this? It's more so like something we'd see out of the Ruy Lopez. So moving forward here, white with d5 grabs some space, but at the same time, black is able to grab some space with c4, or at least that's what black is preparing to do with his next move. First, rook to b8. You really don't want to move this pawn and open this square on c4 for, let's say, a knight or a bishop. And so you want to reinforce this point. Rook to b8 is anticipating this a4 advance. So after rook to b8, a4 is there, c4. So white has some space in the center. Black has some space on the queen side with c4, and with that comes a new square for the knight on c5. And there's support points. This pawn is lending support on these d3 and b3 squares. Now, one thing that I had wondered, this is really turning out to be a queenside battle. Not much going on over here on the king side of the board. Eventually stuff will happen there, but for right now, the big battle is about the squares on the queen side. I had wondered about something here. Instead of a4, well, what ended up happening after a4? After a4, we saw c4, and this allowed knight c5 to follow. It's a strong piece on that square. Is there a way you could prevent that? Let's see what happened in the game first. c4, takes, and then b4. So the idea behind this is to stop knight here. Maybe you could still work with that, because after b4, that pawn was taken, and then the knight jumped right in there. But what if, in this position right here, instead of instead of a4, what about b3? Isn't that a little bit different? Right? If c4 now, then you have b4, and the knight won't be making use of c5. And then maybe there's this idea, with maybe the capture, or maybe the push, or maybe just let him sit there and make black guess as to what's going to happen with the pawn structure. So, interesting idea, I think, at least. I'm sure it's been played before, but just maybe something to look into. You know, if you're looking for maybe a different type of pawn structure to be working with on just this queen section of the board, or the queen side of the board, maybe b3. If c4, then you have this as a possibility. But okay, we didn't have that. After rook to b8, it was a4, c4, takes, b4, takes, knight c5. Okay, so he has a nice square. Bishop's hit. He runs away. Bishop d7. So with this, seems a very tame move. It's connecting the rooks, however, and now allowing for rook to a8. White still needs some development on the queen side, and black is looking to challenge the rook, who is unprotected on a1, looking to gain control over the a file. Additionally, this bishop is indirectly controlling a5, and so that'll reinforce some pivot on that square. We'll see that take shape soon. So, first, bishop a3, rook a8, knight d7, knight a5. Bishop takes, rook takes. I guess that knight was pretty much intolerable after knight a5, putting pressure on c3 twice. It's protected how many times? 0. I guess the knight has to go. Bishop takes, rook takes. Bishop b4. Okay, so at least there's some coordination here. The bishop on b4. But you don't take, you just put more pressure on that rook. Rook takes, now pawn takes. Another structural change, this pawn is passed. This square becomes very important. Well, I don't know if I would say very important, but it's a square that a knight would really love to get to. In an ideal world, you'd really like to have the dark square bishops exchange and sink the knight right in here on that c5 square, connecting or guarding the pawn, putting pressure here, doing just too many good things for black. So Pawn takes, knight to b1, looking to reposition, looking to stop that pawn from going any further. So I guess the bishop did his job. He's looking to do some more damage here, putting some pressure on the knight, placing the knight in a pin. Knight to h5, queen to e3, knight to f4, rook to a1, and now after f5 there's an interesting tactical shot that white had available. You could see it on the side here in the evaluation. It's saying knight takes e5. Very cool combination coming up. Pawn takes, and now d6. Bishop takes, and now with this fork, that would have been interesting. Queen c6, knight takes d, f takes e, and we could have had this type of situation where I believe white has good control over this passed pawn. The bishop is well placed. Potential opposite color bishops, good home for the knight. Something like f3 to reinforce his position. Interesting possibility that team white had at this point after f5. This knight takes e5 shot. It was not played. Instead, knight b5, queen d7. That tactic is no longer there. F takes e, knight d2, knight takes d5. There's a tactical shot. If pawn takes knight, the queen's sweeping in. Very active. We don't have that. Instead, queen takes, knight b6 is also there to defend the rook. Knight c3. Queen is kicked out of that central post. You no longer have to worry about the pressure on your rook. The queen is now granted a new square on c6, and from here it's just a rout at this point. Just too much pressure to deal with on c4. The queens are exchanged. This pawn is picked up, but this is there's no hope at this point. The rook is tied down to the bishop's defense. There's still potential back rank issues. You could kick the knight with this e5 move, and then, or excuse me, d5 kicking the knight, and then d4 kicking the other knight. So these pieces, in other words, are unstable. Back rank issues still. This rook is tethered to the bishop's defense, and this turns out to be a very forcing sequence. After there's a flight square here with h3, king f8, the knight drops back, and now this rook is kicked. The knight is attacked. Bishop takes knight. You have to recapture the piece. This rook has to stay on this rank to defend the bishop. It's the only safe square. Not safe anymore. Rook to h4. Excuse me. Excuse me. And you just have to be a little bit careful. You don't take here because of this. So what do? Well, you simply attack the rook with the pawn. And that's pretty much game over. After knight to e3, pawn takes rook, knight takes bishop, rook to b5, and that'll do it. The knight is hit. If he moves, the bishop is won, and that's just game over. There's no way to save this one. So that's all for this video. Feel free to click the annotation link at the end of this video for round 9 of this tournament, or check in the video's description for the links to the 14 other games.